The clatter of silver on porcelain was the only music Eleanor Vance ever truly enjoyed. It was the sound of order, of precision, of a world operating exactly as it should. At 82, she had curated a life built on such principles. Her fortune, inherited and then quadrupled through shrewd, silent investments, was a testament to her belief that the most powerful forces were often the most discreet. Tonight, she was a ghost in her own machine, seated at a corner table at L'Etoile d'Or, the crown jewel of her hospitality empire, a fact known to precisely 3 people, none of whom were in the building. To the staff, she was just Mrs. Peterson, a wealthy widow who came in every 3rd Tuesday, ordered the tasting menu, and tipped exactly 22%. She preferred it that way. Anonymity was the lens through which she saw the truth. The truth, tonight, was beginning to sour. It started not with a shout, but with a sneer, a sound that cut through the restaurant's polite hum like a shard of glass. It came from Table 7, the prime real estate overlooking the park, currently occupied by Alistair Finch, a real estate developer whose buildings were as loud and graceless as his personality. With him was his son Julian, a young man who wore his father's fortune like a poorly tailored suit. Their waitress, a young woman named Clara, stood beside their table, her posture a fragile balance of deference and tension. Eleanor had noticed her before. She was new, perhaps a few months on the job, but she moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of diligence. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple, neat bun, and her uniform, though standard issue, was impeccably crisp. There was a seriousness in her eyes that seemed older than her face. "Is there a problem, sir?" Clara asked, her voice low and steady. Alistair Finch leaned back, a theatrical display of disgust. He poked at the magnificent cut of beef on his plate with his fork. "A problem? Honey, this isn't a steak. It's a tragedy. It's a piece of leather you've had the audacity to serve me." Julian snickered. "Dad, I don't think she understands. Maybe you should use smaller words." Eleanor felt a familiar tightening in her chest. It was the particular brand of arrogance she despised most, the kind that needed an audience, the kind that fed on the humiliation of others. Clara's gaze flickered to the steak. Eleanor, from her vantage point, could see the perfect ruby-red center, the dark, savory crust. It was a 60-day dry-aged picanha culotte, the chef's signature dish. A difficult cut to master, but one that, when executed correctly, was sublime. From here, it looked perfect. "I'm very sorry you're not pleased, Mr. Finch," Clara said, her tone meticulously professional. "I can assure you the chef prepared it medium rare, exactly as you requested." Finch slammed his fork down. The sound made a nearby couple jump. "Are you calling me a liar? Are you, a $20 an hour napkin folder, questioning my palate?" He waved a dismissive hand. "Look at this char. It's burnt, ruined. Get it out of my sight and get me your manager. Now, I want to talk to someone who actually understands quality." The word quality was a weapon in his mouth. Clara flinched, but her composure held. "Of course, sir. Right away." As she turned, her eyes briefly met Eleanor's. In that fleeting glance, Eleanor saw not just the sting of insult, but a flicker of something else. Frustration. The frustration of a knowledgeable person being silenced by an ignorant one. It was a look Eleanor knew intimately. Clara retreated toward the manager's station, her steps measured, her back straight. She was a ship sailing through a storm, pretending the waves weren't breaking over the deck. But Eleanor Vance had built her empire by understanding the currents beneath the surface, and she could see that this young woman was carrying a cargo far more precious than Alistair Finch's dinner. The storm, she suspected, was just beginning. If you have ever been made to feel small, to feel invisible, to have your knowledge dismissed by the loud and the powerful, then what Clara does next will stir a fire in your soul. Because Alistair Finch thought he was correcting a waitress, he had no idea he was lecturing the one person in the room who understood that steak better than the man who was paying for it. And the price for that lesson was about to become steeper than any item on the menu. Marcus Thorne, the general manager of L'Etoile d'Or, felt the familiar throb behind his right eye that always signaled the arrival of Alistair Finch. He was 66, a veteran of the New York restaurant scene, with a spine permanently curved from decades of bending to the whims of men like Finch. He had seen chefs throw pans, critics destroy careers with a single sentence, and investors pull funding over the temperature of a soup. He was a master of de-escalation, a diplomat in a war zone of egos. He saw Clara approaching, her face a pale mask of control. "Table 7, she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Finch, he says his picanha is burnt." Marcus sighed, the sound a mix of resignation and fatigue. "Of course he does. It's Tuesday. His GCI Holdings deal must have hit a snag." He straightened his tie, a small, reflexive gesture of girding himself for battle. "Stay here, let me handle it." He walked toward table 7, his smile as carefully constructed as the restaurant's decor. "Alistair, my friend," he began, his voice smooth as aged port. "A pleasure to have you with us tonight. I hear there's a slight issue with your steak?" Finch pointed a thick finger at the plate. "Slight issue? Marcus, this is an insult to cattle everywhere. My son here ordered the same thing, and his is perfect. Mine is a hockey puck. I think your kitchen staff is either incompetent or they have a personal vendetta against me." Marcus glanced at the steak. He, like Eleanor, saw perfection. He also saw the game. Finch didn't want a new steak. He wanted a performance. He wanted subjugation. It was part of the dining experience for him. "I am terribly sorry," Marcus said, signaling a busboy to clear the plate with a subtle flick of his wrist. "Unacceptable. I'll have Chef Antoine prepare another for you immediately. And of course, your entire meal tonight is on the house, including that lovely bottle of Chateau Margaux." Julian smirked, swirling his wine. "See, Dad, that's service." But Finch wasn't satisfied. His eyes, cold and reptilian, scanned the room until they landed on Clara, who was standing near the service station, trying to be invisible. "That's not enough, Marcus. The food is one thing, but the service, appalling." Marcus's smile tightened by a millimeter. "Clara is one of our newer servers, but she is exceptionally diligent. I'm sure it was a simple misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Finch boomed, his voice rising. Heads turned. "She was insolent. She argued with me. She questioned my judgment. In my world, Marcus, when an employee shows that kind of insubordination, they're not just corrected, they're removed. I want her fired." The air in the restaurant shifted. The polite hum of conversation died, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. This was no longer about a steak. It was a public execution. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Firing a girl for a customer's manufactured complaint? It was grotesque. It was wrong. But Finch wasn't just any customer. He was a stakeholder in the parent company, a man whose angry phone call could have Marcus out of a job before the dessert course was served. He thought of his wife's medical bills, the mortgage on their small house in Queens. He was too old to start over. He looked over at Clara. Her hands were clenched at her sides, but her chin was up. He saw the quiet dignity in her stance and felt a pang of self-loathing. He was the manager. He was supposed to protect his staff. "Alistair," Marcus said, lowering his voice, trying to pull the situation back from the brink. "Perhaps we can discuss this in my office. Firing her seems excessive." "Excessive?" Finch laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "It's necessary. It's about standards. A place like this is only as good as its weakest link, and tonight, she is it. Fire her, Marcus, or I'll be having a long chat with the board tomorrow about whether you're still the right man to maintain the standards of this establishment." The threat hung in the air, glittering and sharp. Marcus felt trapped. Every instinct screamed at him to defend his employee, to tell Finch to take his money and his ego and leave. But the pragmatist, the survivor who had weathered 40 years in this brutal business, knew what he had to do. He walked back to Clara, avoiding her eyes. "Go to the break room," he said, his voice a low, defeated rasp. "Just stay out of sight for the rest of the night. I'll handle this." "But I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "The steak was perfect. I saw it before it left the pass." "I know," Marcus said, his voice laced with a bitterness that tasted like bile. "But he doesn't care about the steak, kid. He never does." He turned away before she could see the shame in his eyes. As he walked back to appease Finch, he felt the weight of every compromise he'd ever made settle on his shoulders. He was maintaining standards, all right. The standards of powerful men who treated the world like their personal playground. And tonight, Clara was the one who had been pushed off the swings. From her corner table, Eleanor Vance watched the entire exchange. She saw Marcus's capitulation, the slump of his shoulders, the death of a small piece of his integrity. She saw Clara's retreat, her dignity, a fragile shield against a world that had just declared it worthless. Eleanor took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. The gears in her mind, quiet and precise, began to turn. She had designed L'Etoile d'Or to be a sanctuary of excellence, but a sanctuary that protected the wolves while sacrificing the lambs was not a sanctuary at all. It was a hunting ground. And Mrs. Peterson, the quiet widow in the corner, was about to remind everyone who owned the preserve. The employee break room was a cramped, windowless space that smelled of bleach and old coffee. Clara sank onto a worn plastic chair, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaving her hands shaking. Humiliation burned in her chest, hot and acidic. She wasn't just a waitress. She was the granddaughter of a butcher and the daughter of a baker. Food was in her blood. She had spent the last 2 years working double shifts here and at a morning diner, saving every penny for tuition at the Culinary Institute of America. Her dream was to be a chef, not to argue with bullies about things they didn't understand. She closed her eyes, picturing her grandmother's kitchen, the scent of yeast and roasting garlic, the comforting weight of a well-worn knife in her hand. Her grandmother, Maria, had taught her everything: how to read the marbling on a cut of beef, how to feel the doneness of bread with a tap of her finger, how to build flavor in layers, with patience and respect for the ingredients. "Food doesn't lie, mija," Maria would say, her hands covered in flour. "It tells the truth about who cooked it. Be honest in your work, and the food will speak for you." But out there, the truth didn't matter. Her knowledge was worthless against Finch's power. She had recognized the picanha instantly when it came to the pass. Chef Antoine's technique was legendary. He used a reverse sear for the dry-aged cuts, cooking them low and slow before finishing them in a screaming hot cast-iron skillet with butter and thyme. It created a perfect edge-to-edge, medium-rare interior, while rendering the thick, fat cap into a crispy, flavorful crust. The char Finch complained about was the Maillard reaction, the beautiful alchemy of amino acids and sugars that created hundreds of new flavor compounds. It was the mark of a perfectly cooked steak. To call it burnt was like calling a diamond too shiny. A wave of anger washed over her, momentarily eclipsing the shame. She had tried to stay calm, to follow the rules, to be the professional Marcus expected. But what was the point of professionalism when the other side was playing a different game entirely? The break room door creaked open. It was Leo, one of the line cooks, a wiry young man with a passion for sauces and a deep disdain for front-of-house drama. He held out a small bowl of soup. "Figured you could use this," he mumbled, not quite meeting her eye. "It's the celeriac velouté. Chef's testing it for the fall menu." Clara took the bowl, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. "Thanks, Leo." "Heard what happened," Leo said, leaning against the doorframe. "Finch is a piece of work. Last month, he sent back the lobster bisque because he said it tasted too much like lobster." He shook his head. "Don't let him get to you. He doesn't know a thing about food. He just knows how to be rich." "He wants me fired," Clara said, the words tasting like ash. Leo's face hardened. "Marcus won't let that happen. He's a company man, but he's not heartless." "He looked scared," Clara admitted. "We're all scared of men like Finch," Leo said quietly. "They don't just buy dinner. They buy the whole restaurant, the whole block, the whole city. They think that gives them the right to buy people too." He pushed off the doorframe. "Look, just lay low. He'll eat his free steak, drink his free wine, and forget all about you by morning. It's how the machine works." He left, and Clara was alone with the soup. She took a spoonful. It was exquisite, silky, earthy, with a hint of truffle and toasted hazelnut. It was honest. It told the truth about the chef who made it. She thought of her grandmother's words. "The food will speak for you." But who was speaking for the people who served the food? Who was speaking for her? The machine Leo talked about was designed to grind people like her into dust, to sacrifice them to keep the gears turning for men like Finch. She had always believed that if she worked hard, kept her head down, and honed her craft, her talent would eventually be recognized. It was the promise her parents, immigrants who had built a life from nothing, had instilled in her. Tonight, that promise felt like a lie. Keeping her head down hadn't earned her respect. It had made her a target. Her knowledge hadn't protected her. It had been dismissed as insolence. She took another spoonful of soup, the warmth spreading through her, but it couldn't touch the cold knot of injustice in her stomach. Leo was wrong. Finch wouldn't forget. Men like him never forgot a challenge to their authority, no matter how small. He wouldn't be satisfied until he knew he had broken her. And in the sterile quiet of the break room, a new, unfamiliar feeling began to take root in Clara's heart. It was a hard, sharp resolve. She was tired of being quiet. She was tired of being invisible. If the machine was broken, maybe it was time someone had the courage to throw a wrench in the gears. She didn't know how, but she knew she couldn't just sit here and wait for Marcus to save her. She had to save herself. Meanwhile, at table 7, Marcus was in the final stages of his ritual humiliation. He poured Finch another glass of the 1982 Margot, a wine that cost more than Clara's weekly salary. "There," Finch said, taking a bite of his new, identical steak. "Perfect. See how easy that is when people just listen." Marcus smiled his paper-thin smile. "We aim to please, Alistair." But as he walked away from the table, he felt Eleanor Vance's eyes on him, the quiet widow in the corner. She looked at him, not with pity or judgment, but with a piercing clarity that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed facade, right down to the compromised man beneath. For the first time all night, Marcus felt a different kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of a bully's tantrum. It was the fear of a quiet observer who sees everything and understands even more. And he had the unsettling feeling that the real power in the room wasn't sitting at table 7 at all. The tension in the dining room had simmered down to a low boil. Diners resumed their conversations, but their glances kept straying toward table 7, where Alistair Finch held court like a petty king, his victory secured. Marcus moved through the room with a forced, brittle cheerfulness, trying to mend the fractured atmosphere. He avoided looking toward the service station, where Clara, having been told she could resume her duties for other tables but to stay clear of Finch, was now working with a robotic, guarded precision. Eleanor watched it all unfold. She saw the fear Finch had sown among the staff. A busboy hurried past his table with his eyes downcast. Another waitress, taking a dessert order from the adjacent table, kept her voice to a near whisper. He had poisoned the well, and everyone was afraid to drink. This was the rot she worked so hard to prevent. A single toxic personality, left unchecked, could corrode the culture of an entire organization. Marcus, for all his experience, was managing the symptom, not the disease. He was applying a bandage to a wound that required surgery. The evening wore on. Finch and his son became louder, fueled by the expensive wine and the thrill of their conquest. Julian, emboldened, began making snide comments to the waitress serving them now, a young woman named Sophia, who absorbed them with a pained, frozen smile. The catalyst came unexpectedly. Clara was carrying a tray laden with crystal glasses of champagne for a celebratory party at table 12. Her path required her to pass near Finch's domain. She gave the table a wide berth, her focus entirely on the delicate, top-heavy flutes in her hands. As she drew level with them, Julian Finch deliberately stretched his legs out into the aisle, a lazy, arrogant movement. He looked directly at Clara, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oops," he said, a fraction of a second before her foot connected with his ankle. The trajectory of the fall was a nightmare in slow motion. The tray tilted, a waterfall of gold liquid and shattering glass. Clara twisted her body, a desperate, instinctive attempt to avoid the worst of the impact. But it was no use. The entire contents of the tray crashed onto the floor, splashing champagne and shards of crystal across the expensive shoes of a woman at the next table. The woman shrieked. The dining room fell silent again, this time with the sharp, collective intake of breath that precedes a catastrophe. Clara stood frozen amidst the wreckage, champagne soaking the hem of her apron. Her face was ashen. Alistair Finch rose to his feet, his face a mask of theatrical fury. "Incompetent, utterly, dangerously incompetent," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. "Now look what you've done. You've assaulted my son, you've ruined this woman's evening, and you've destroyed hundreds of dollars of property. This is what I was talking about, Marcus. This is the standard of service you're defending." Julian feigned injury, rubbing his ankle. "She just walked right into me. No awareness whatsoever." Marcus rushed over, his face a sickly grey. He started to apologize to the splattered woman, to Finch, to the room at large. But this time, something in him had snapped. He had seen Julian's deliberate act. He had seen the smirk. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculated act of cruelty. "Sir, I saw what happened," Marcus began, his voice shaking with a rage he hadn't felt in years. "Your son tripped her." Finch's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you insane? You're taking her side over mine? After everything I've done for this company?" "What you've done," a clear, calm voice cut through the chaos, "is terrorize a young woman and lie about it." Every head in the room turned. Eleanor Vance was on her feet. She had shed the persona of the meek Mrs. Peterson. She now stood with the unshakable authority of a woman who owned worlds. She walked slowly, deliberately, from her corner table toward the wreckage. Her simple black dress seemed to command more respect than all of Finch's bluster. She stopped beside Clara, placing a gentle, steadying hand on her arm. She didn't look at Finch. She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "For 40 years, you have been one of the finest managers in this city. But you have a flaw. You confuse appeasement with diplomacy. You have allowed a cancer to grow in this restaurant because you were afraid to cut it out. Tonight, that ends." Marcus stared at her, his mouth agape. "Mrs. Peterson, I don't understand." "My name is not Peterson," she said, her gaze finally shifting to Alistair Finch, who was now looking at her with a dawning, horrified recognition. "It is Eleanor Vance, and I am the majority owner of the Vantage Hospitality Group, which means, Mr. Finch, that this is my restaurant." A collective gasp swept through the room. Finch's face went from crimson to a pasty white. Julian looked like he might be sick. "Now," Eleanor continued, her voice as cold and hard as diamond, "I believe you were complaining about the quality of the food. Let's talk about quality." She turned to Clara. "Young lady, what was wrong with Mr. Finch's first steak?" Clara, stunned into silence, could only blink. Eleanor's grip on her arm was reassuring. "Tell me, as an expert." The word expert hung in the air. It was a gift, a shield, a weapon. Clara took a deep breath, the scent of spilled champagne sharp in her nostrils. She looked at Alistair Finch, not as a powerful titan, but as a man who knew nothing about the thing he was trying to destroy her over. And the truth, her grandmother's truth, rose up in her. "There was nothing wrong with it," Clara said, her voice clear and strong, all trace of fear gone. "It was a 60-day dry-aged picanha culotte. The chef prepared it with a reverse sear to ensure a perfect wall-to-wall medium rare, which is the only way to properly cook a cut with that density and fat cap. The char you complained about was a perfect Maillard crust, essential for the flavor profile. You didn't send back a mistake. You sent back a masterpiece because you lack the palate to appreciate it." A low murmur of appreciation came from a table in the back, where a well-known food critic was dining. He nodded slowly, a small smile on his face. Eleanor's eyes glinted. She turned back to Finch. "It seems my staff knows more about my product than some of my investors. You, sir, are a bully, and your son is a vandal. You have harassed my employees, disturbed my patrons, and attempted to defraud my restaurant by manufacturing a complaint to get a free meal." She gestured to Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, please present Mr. Finch with his full bill, including the steak he sent back, the champagne this young woman was forced to drop, and a service charge of 25% for the emotional distress caused to the staff." Finch sputtered, his face a mottled mess of rage and humiliation. "You can't. I'll sell my char." The silence Alistair Finch left in his wake was a physical presence, a vacuum where his blustering ego had been. He paid the bill with a palsied hand, his signature a furious, illegible slash. Julian, his face the color of old parchment, scurried after him, not daring to meet the eyes of the staff he had so casually tormented. As the heavy oak door swung shut behind them, a strange sound rippled through the dining room, a quiet, scattered applause, tentative at first, then growing in confidence. It was the sound of a collective exhale, the breaking of a fever. Marcus Thorne stood amidst the wreckage, both literal and metaphorical, feeling as though the ground had been ripped out from under him, only to be replaced by something far more solid. He looked at his staff, who were watching him with an unreadable expression. It wasn't the simple respect he had once commanded through title alone. It was something more complex, a mixture of pity for his earlier failure and a dawning understanding that he too had been a prisoner. He looked at Clara, who was now being helped by Sophia, her hands carefully picking up the larger shards of crystal. He had been her shield, her manager, and he had buckled. A stranger, a ghost in their own machine, had done the job he was paid to do. The shame was a metallic taste in his mouth. He took a breath, the air still thick with the scent of spilled champagne and ozone from the recent storm. "Everyone," he managed, his voice a raw nerve. Let's restore the room. Service continues." But as the staff moved to obey, a new efficiency in their step, he knew nothing would be the same. The gears of the machine had not just been stopped. They had been fundamentally re-engineered before his eyes. He walked over to Clara, the journey of 20 feet feeling like a mile. "Clara," he began, the name foreign in his own mouth. There are no words to express my failure tonight. I am sorry." She looked up at him, her eyes clear of tears, filled instead with a startling, unnerving calm. "You were afraid, Mr. Thorne," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "He made you afraid. It was a pardon he had not earned, and it cut deeper than any reprimand." Before he could respond, he saw that Eleanor Vance had not left. She had returned to her table, settled her bill with cash, and was now approaching him. "A word, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice low and precise. She led him to the now empty table 7, the scene of the crime. She ran a single finger over the pristine white tablecloth. "Tell me, Marcus, who does this restaurant serve? The man who can afford the most expensive bottle of wine, or the principles upon which it was built? For 40 years you have brilliantly served the former. I am left to wonder if you still remember how to serve the latter." She did not wait for an answer. She simply gave him a long, appraising look, a look that stripped him bare of his title, his experience, his carefully constructed persona. And then she was gone, a ghost slipping back into the New York night. Marcus stood alone at the empty table, the weight of her question pressing down on him more heavily than Finch's threats ever could. The next morning, Clara stood before the monolithic brass and glass entrance to the Vantage Hospitality Group. She clutched a worn leather portfolio containing not just a resume, but the sum of her life's secret passion. Notebooks filled with her grandfather's butchery diagrams, her mother's fermentation schedules, and her own obsessive, late-night sketches of plating designs. She wore her only interview dress, a simple navy sheath, but she felt as though she were wearing a costume. The fear she felt was a universe away from the cold dread of the previous night. This was a new terror, the vertigo of sudden grace, the fear of an impossible opportunity that might vanish if she blinked. She was escorted to the penthouse floor by a silent assistant. The office was not what she expected. It was a library, a sanctuary, lined with books on everything from Roman history to cellular gastronomy. The view of Manhattan was breathtaking, but the room itself felt grounded, human. Eleanor Vance sat behind a large, uncluttered desk, dressed in a soft grey cashmere that made her look more like a tenured professor than a corporate empress. "Miss Morales," Eleanor said, her voice the same calm instrument that had sliced through the chaos of the restaurant. "Please, sit." Clara sat, placing the portfolio on her lap like a shield. "I have read your file," Eleanor began, forgoing pleasantries. "It is the file of a diligent and reliable employee. It is not, however, the file of a person who can, under extreme duress, deliver a flawless technical analysis of a reverse-seared picanha culotte. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with genuine curiosity. "Tell me who you are, Miss Morales. Not the waitress. The expert." Clara took a breath, and for the first time opened her portfolio to a stranger. She explained the legacy of flour and steel that ran through her veins, the dream of the Culinary Institute, the double shifts, the quiet, relentless saving. As she spoke, Eleanor listened with an unnerving stillness, her gaze fixed on the detailed notes and drawings. A slow, authentic smile touched her lips. "I see," she said, her voice softening with understanding. "This is not a job to you. It is a language." At that moment, the office door opened. Marcus Thorne was shown in. He looked ashen, hollowed out, as if he hadn't slept. He had come with a letter of resignation in his pocket, the only act of integrity he felt he had left. Seeing Clara already there, he faltered, a fresh wave of shame washing over him. He assumed he was here for a final, ritualistic dismissal in front of the employee he had failed. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice raspy. "Before you say anything, I came here to tender my resignation. My conduct last night was inexcusable. I placed self-preservation above my duty, my staff, and the values of this establishment. I am no longer fit to manage it." Eleanor held up a hand, stopping him. "There is no excuse, you are right. But there is a context. You are the product of a system that has, for decades, rewarded the appeasement of bullies. A system that I, through my own inattention, allowed to fester. You acted as you have been conditioned to act. I do not admire your actions, Marcus, but I understand their genesis." She paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. "The question is not what you did last night, but what you have decided this morning. You came here to resign. Why?" Marcus looked at his hands, then at Clara. Because the person in charge should be the person who protects his people, not the one who needs to be reminded of his duty by a customer, even if that customer is the owner." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, warmed Eleanor's cool gaze. "Good," she said simply. "Then you're ready for your new position." She slid a thick folder across the desk. Marcus stared at it, uncomprehending. What? "I am not promoting the man who stood by last night, Marcus. I am promoting the man who walked in here prepared to resign this morning. That man understands the cost of cowardice. Finch was a symptom. The disease is a culture that equates wealth with worth and power with impunity. It exists in varying degrees across my entire portfolio. I need a physician to cure it." The folder was titled Vice President, Cultural and Operational Integrity. It was a new role, a new division. The mandate was sweeping, to rewrite training protocols, to establish an empowered and anonymous ethics committee for staff, to hold final authority on barring abusive clientele. It was a position of immense power, but not of comfort. It was a front-line command. "You will answer only to me," Eleanor stated. "You will no longer be able to hide behind policy. You will be the policy. It will be the most difficult, thankless work of your life, and it is the only path to your redemption." Marcus opened the folder, his hands trembling. He saw not just a job offer, but a lifeline, a chance to rebuild the man he had lost piece by piece over 40 years of compromise. He looked up, his eyes shining with a profound, painful gratitude. "I will not fail you again," he whispered. "No," Eleanor agreed. "You will not." She then turned her formidable attention back to Clara. "And you, Miss Morales, Your ambition is the Culinary Institute, a noble goal. But your notebooks tell me you are past the point of basic instruction. The Vance Foundation will grant you a full scholarship to be used whenever you see fit. However, I have a more immediate proposition. An investment. She picked up one of Clara's notebooks, opened to a page detailing the breakdown of a whole lamb. Chef Antoine is a brilliant, tempestuous tyrant. He respects only one thing: talent that is welded to discipline. I took the liberty of sending him a few photographs of these pages this morning. His response was 2 words: "Bring her." Eleanor leaned back. "I am offering you a paid, formal apprenticeship in the kitchen of l'Étoile d'Or. You will start at the very bottom. You will peel, you will chop, you will clean. You will be tested and screamed at. But you will learn, and if you are who I believe you are, you will thrive." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. An apprenticeship with Antoine. It was a fantasy so far beyond her carefully managed dreams that she couldn't process it. Tears, hot and sudden, blurred the impossible view of the city below. I don't know what to say." "There is nothing to say," Eleanor said gently. "There is only work to be done. Be honest in that work, Miss Morales, and the food will speak for you." Clara looked up, startled, hearing her grandmother's creed, the central pillar of her own quiet faith, echoed back to her from the heights of this corporate Olympus. And in that moment, she understood. This wasn't charity. This was recognition. A year is both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The legend of Alistair Finch's spectacular fall from grace became a hushed, cautionary tale whispered among the city's elite, a reminder that some establishments had a soul that could not be bought. Marcus Thorne, as the new VP of Integrity, became a quiet revolutionary. He travelled to every Vantage property, not with the swagger of an executive, but with the humility of a penitent. He sat with dishwashers, listened to line cooks, and held town halls with the front-of-house staff. He dismantled the old unspoken rule: the customer is always right. He replaced it with a new one: respect is a two-way street. He faced down mutinies from old guard managers and weathered the indignant fury of wealthy patrons who found their special status had been revoked. It was a slow, grinding war for the heart of the company, fought one human interaction at a time. But for the first time in his career, he went home at night feeling not depleted, but whole. Clara's apprenticeship was a trial by fire. The kitchen was a brutal, hierarchical world of heat, noise, and relentless pressure. She spent the first 3 months shucking a mountain of oysters each day until her hands were raw, her only reward a grunt from the sous chef. She peeled countless sunchokes, cleaned endless squid, and mastered the monotonous art of the perfect tournée. She was invisible, a ghost in a new machine. But she never complained. She watched, she absorbed, she learned the rhythm of the kitchen, the subtle language of a nod from Chef Antoine, the precise temperature at which butter begins to brown and sing. Her breakthrough came not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet observation. Antoine was struggling with a new dish, a complex ballotine of pheasant. It was technically perfect, but lacked, as he furiously declared, a soul. Clara, silently polishing glasses at her station long after her shift had ended, saw him staring at the dish in disgust. "Chef," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerators. He glared at her. "The smokiness of the lardons you use in the farce. It is fighting the delicate flavor of the bird. Perhaps a brighter acidity? Something to lift it? A gastrique made with cider vinegar and star anise." Antoine stared at her, then at the dish. He tasted it again, his palate recalibrating. Without a word, he moved to a stove, splashed vinegar into a pan, added sugar and spice, and reduced it with furious speed. He drizzled the dark, fragrant syrup over a slice of the ballotine. He ate it. His eyes, for a moment, closed. He opened them and looked at Clara, truly looked at her. For the first time, he saw not the apprentice, not the ex-waitress, but a palate, an intellect, a chef. "Morales," he grunted, "tomorrow you are on the sauce station." Now, a year to the day, Eleanor Vance sat at her corner table. Marcus joined her, not as a manager, but as a friend. He looked 10 years younger, the anxious tension gone from his shoulders. "The new special tonight," Marcus said, a deep pride in his voice, "is the first dish created entirely by our new sous chef." A plate was placed before Eleanor. It was a dish of impossibly seared dayboat scallops, resting on a silken cloud of celeriac velouté, finished with a toasted hazelnut and black truffle vinaigrette. It was the soup from the break room, reborn. It tasted of the earth, of the sea, and of a spirit that had refused to be broken. It was a dish that spoke of a journey from a windowless room of despair to the pinnacle of a legendary kitchen. It was honest. It was true. Eleanor looked across the dining room, which felt different now, not just elegant, but serene. The staff moved with a relaxed confidence. She saw a young waiter, calmly but firmly, informing a guest that his raised voice was not welcome. She saw Marcus watching, a small approving nod, his only intervention. Her gaze drifted to the swinging doors of the kitchen. For a brief moment, she saw Clara. She was no longer in a waitress's uniform or an apprentice's apron, but in the crisp white jacket of a sous chef, her name embroidered in blue over her heart. Her hair was still pulled back in that same neat bun, but her face, once a mask of careful neutrality, was alive, flushed with the heat and the passion of her art. She was a creator in her element, the conductor of a symphony of flavor. She was not hiding. She was not invisible. She was home. Eleanor took another bite of the exquisite dish. The food was speaking, telling a story not just of one young woman's triumph, but of a culture reborn. It spoke of integrity restored, of talent nurtured, and of the simple, revolutionary idea that true quality is measured not by the price of the wine, but by the dignity afforded to the person who serves it. The machine had not been broken. It had been given a new heart, and it was beating stronger than ever.